So in this image I've created shapes, vector shapes in Affinity Photo to more or less mask the windows on these two buildings, and I don't have these on the bottom done because they're basically not in frame. They are, but they're not. But I wanted to show by example on this video where we can control the actual lighting on this image as opposed to just having the as shot lighting. So there's quite a few different glares going on in these windows, and say you wanted just one overlying glare direction or scope. With doing that, you need shapes to mask that too. So you can create all these shapes. I grouped them as you can see here and just filled them with like a light gray color. And eventually we're going to add a blend mode of overlay on it, and that still allows the window itself to, seep through that color, but we're adding a bit of depth and hue to it to give it a different effect. So the strength in this approach is where we add our own lighting, and what you can do is go to filters, lighting right here, and by default it's going to rasterize those layers that you created. So make sure at that point you've created everything you needed to. It's kind of a bummer, but it is the state of the game when that comes into effect. And to make this work and appear the way you want, you can drag this light source from any which angle you choose. So I'm going to go from the top left here and kind of just align it to the way I think would look best. I think that's looking okay to me. You can add multiple lighting components here and just adjust the ambience as well. All of these settings are quite configurable and very awesome to work with, so feel free to experiment there. There's multiple lights. Like I said, you can add another and go to town. Probably just go back to 1 and just leave that as is. You can go and adjust the types, the distance, all this stuff, direction. You can adjust the direction here, but it's way easier to do it with these handles. So just experiment, like I said, and if you want to increase the texture, we can do that too even. So that's cool. We're going to apply it, and you'll notice all the shapes have that lighting effect on them. And the strength here is that I want to add that overlay effect now too. And it's going to be pretty dramatic at this point, so it's very pronounced, but we can kind of come back with that effect and just, see what looks the best at this point. So here's it with nothing. You see how dull it is. To enhance it quite a bit, we can add, let's say 60%. Great. So already the photo is looking great in this regard. So we've got that shape. Those are in play. We can go one step further and just enhance the photo with some basic levels and curves. So I'll add maybe some blacks in and some whites. And one more effect for the curves. Let's do, I guess, a real subtle S-curve here. And we can even go and create just a high pass filter on this. So let's go into our channels. I'm going to add a selection that's going to be based on the highlights. So to do that, you can select that background there. Go to select, tonal range, select highlights, and it should select all the highlighted portions. From there, we can go to channels, and I'll right click on this pixel selection and create a spare channel. This I'm just going to call highlights by renaming it, right clicking and renaming it. So we'll call it highlights. And so we have that in our arsenal. From there we can go and adjust those curves in this regard with those highlights. So the way that works is make sure that curves layer is selected, come back to highlights, right click and load curves to adjustment. Okay, so that's subtle, but the curves only apply to the highlights now, so that's great. And it's very subtle. Okay, so let's do that one more time, but I'm going to add a high pass filter in this case. So let's add that filter first. High pass. It's going to have, we're going to bring it to the foreground and just increase it ever so slightly. Get some of those real detailed elements of the buildings in. And then we'll do the same thing. So with the high pass layer selected, come back down to highlights, right click and load to high pass alpha. It's going to be pretty pronounced, so we'll maybe do a linear light and just decrease the opacity some. 50%. And we'll go a little more up from there. So any edge that you see, like the real pronounced edges of the windows now kind of have more sharp look to them. So it kind of increases the sharpness of those points, but only those. So that's the beauty of doing a channel for the highlights. And you can do more in like the midtones or the shadows. There is another video in this course that's going to showcase that. So definitely check that one out. But that's it. That's how you would enhance windows and kind of get the glare on the windows to do what you want in Affinity Photo.